So last week, I wound up getting the chance to go to the Salem exhibition at the New York Historical Society before it closed, like right before it closed. And so took the opportunity to do a little reading on Salem. It turned out that I actually had a book on Salem on hold at the library because I had just heard a podcast interview with the author, and that is J.W. Ocker. I picked up A Season with the Witch. I also have like three of his other books, except not the new one with cryptids, because they don't have that at the Brooklyn Library yet. So yeah, I read up on Salem in preparation for the trip, and then I got to go see it, and just kind of wanted to make a little vlog to commemorate the experience. So the Salem exhibit at the New York Historical Society was put on October through, I believe, January 22nd. So it is just now closed by the time I'm filming this. It is organized by the Peabody Essex Museum, which I have come to know through the book I read. Kind of randomly, it turned out really interesting. And the whole title of it is The Salem Witch Trials, Reclaiming and Reckoning. And in that, they want to talk about kind of what happened at the Salem Witch Trials, the history of it, and bring it together with concepts of witchcraft and how we think of witches today, with a really interesting photo collection right at the end of modern day witches and their stories. And I actually found that part to be the most interesting in the exhibit because the rest of it was kind of not the best. So I want to be a little careful about how I talk about this, because one thing I really learned in A Season with the Witch is that the Peabody Essex Museum distances themselves from the Salem Witch Trials in general. This book was written in 2016, so some of it is a little out of date. It was interesting hearing them talk about the Peabody Essex Museum and how they do not want to put their witch artifacts on exhibit, when I was reading this to go to an exhibit with some of those artifacts. But so I don't want to discourage them from doing that in the future. I think they should do more because, but that was a really interesting kind of addition to my knowledge going into this. To summarize really quickly what this book is about, so I can talk about it in the context of the exhibit. In A Season with the Witch, so Ocker does this thing, and he did it in, I believe, Poeland as well, which is his book where he goes to visit places that are still standing today that Edgar Allan Poe lived at or visited, I believe. Although maybe not visited, it might only be lived at. I'm not sure. So in this one, he goes to live in Salem for the month of October, which is like a party, Halloween party month. And he goes to visit like all the historical sites, all the tourist attractions, just kind of get as much out of the town as possible. And there's a lot of talk about the witch trials and that reputation and what the people who live there feel about it and if they like it or not. I found it really interesting. According to Goodreads, some people do not like this writing style because it's kind of disorganized and all over the place. Although personally, this is just what my brain is like on ADD. So it appealed to me because this is how my brain works. Like in the middle of a sentence, I'll be like, also Nathaniel Hawthorne was here. Talk about that later. Like that's literally how my brain works. So I liked that. The relevant chapter here on the Peabody Essex Museum is he talks with the, I think it's the chief marketing director, who explains they want to be seen. The Peabody Essex Museum, for reference, is in Salem. The Peabody Essex Museum wants to be seen as a legitimate art institution. And I will say, this is like a great piece of like propaganda marketing because it made me want to go see it. I never heard of it before, but I also am not super familiar with a lot of Massachusetts. So like, but they do not like their connection with the town's history and particularly what the people in town and the other museums have been making of it. So it is interesting in that context to see this. I thought they had some interesting artifacts that they had lent out for travel. In particular, the piece I found the most interesting, historically, they had a whole window that was, I believe, Rebecca Nurse's family's house. I'll double check that, but they had it, and it was really interesting. They had it kind of in the middle of the exhibition, so you could look through it and see other people. It is interesting how warped and not like clear windows are at that time period. You could imagine, like, if I was sitting in a house with those kind of windows in the night and you see like shapes off in the distance, that like you're seeing ghosts. 100% you're seeing ghosts. Um, Apart from that, they had some walking sticks, um, a, a what's the call? Like a weaving instrument. I can't remember what it's called. I'll put it up here. That I found particularly interesting because it has like folk magic insignias like etched into it, but it's not the thing that was owned by someone who was accused of being a witch. That was just part of folk magic that was kind of accepted at the time. Um, it's the kind of similar thing with the Venetian glass, which is the incident that triggered this whole thing. I think a lot of exhibits that necessarily don't have a lot of items, especially in the case of historical events like this, where it makes sense that you wouldn't have a lot of items because they're delicate. They travel. People at the time didn't really care to save them. That's something that was really interesting to learn about the Salem Witch Trials. After they happened, everyone in town was kind of like, we need to distance ourselves from this as much as possible. That was embarrassing. So they, I believe, outlawed people writing about it, talking about it. To this day, it was interesting. In A Season with the Witch, he goes to visit some of the historical spots in Danvers, I believe. And the people there, even though Danvers at the time was called Salem Town, or Salem Village, no, Salem Town, the larger area was Salem Village, they changed their name as soon as they could to distance themselves from the Salem witch trials. And even then today, when he's visiting them, people are going like, no, 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 we have none of that witch business here. Do not talk about it. Do not bring it up. Um, so that was interesting. So there's not a lot necessarily of historical items that can authentically be proven to be authentic historical items. So a lot of the exhibit was kind of just random stuff associated with either the time period or the players. Um, but I think you could have gone around that again with signage. I am a firm believer in museums that you always need to assume the person who goes to visit knows nothing. So explaining more, always good. I know there's a thing where people don't necessarily want to have a lot of words, so you're not stuck there just reading a lot, but like maps and images can do so much to help explain this kind of thing. And it's frustrating to me when you can clearly see that the person who designed it assumes you know more than you do. So in this case, there was, for like the walking sticks, they kind of just say, this is this guy's walking stick. In one of the cases, it made sense because the guy was accused of witchcraft, and in the accusation was directly accused of beating a young girl with his walking stick. But I think they could have put in more. What the evidence and the secondary documents they seem to use a lot in the signage was the authentic time period documents, which I do find interesting, but those are pretty hard to read actually, and they didn't all have one-to-one, what's the word, transcripts. They kind of just are like, and here's a document. And I will say, I was looking through some on my genealogy trip because I have someone in my family who was not involved. She was a witness to, I believe, the examination of Bridget Bishop and the two other women who were in there with her. And there was a lot of research I had to do because it's kind of illegible, the signatures. So at the end, I kind of had to like take it on faith that that was her. So, there's a lot of stuff that's hard to read. A lot of the writing is difficult, and they kind of just leave you out there. Although there were some nice big blown up ones which I liked, but I think they could have done more images. They had a Malleus Maleficarum on exhibit, but they didn't have any like spreads from it. I honestly think you could have had a copy that people could leaf through because that book is fun from a modern day perspective. Not at the time, but from a modern day perspective, it's fun. Maybe have some signage that's like, here's the kind of trials they would have gone through. Here's this stuff. the most signage they had was in that first room, where there's kind of not a lot of stuff. They have a lot of words right at the front, and you think it's going to carry on throughout, but really there's only 2 rooms that are about the Salem Witch Trials. The third area is for Alexander McQueen. There's one dress, but there's a lot of documents about his ancestor. I think they could have added some conversation or like a video to explain it about the way he interacts with his ancestor, who was hung as a witch, I believe. Because in his show that's inspired by it, he uses a lot of alchemical magical symbols. And so I find that interesting because he ostensibly is like, she was innocent, she was murdered as a witch, she wasn't one. But the way he interprets that is by embracing the witchiness, the magic, which I don't know, I find really interesting. But they just kind of are like, and here it is. And they had big pictures of the show, but I would have liked more, you know? So the error, that was one thing that kind of drove me nuts, because so I only read this book, which is about Salem town, or Salem village, whatever, Salem, the town. And he doesn't go that deep into the history here. And I watched, in addition to that, I think on the Smithsonian YouTube channel, like a 1 hour short about the Salem Witch Trials and like the locations today, which I actually would recommend if you're not familiar with Salem, if you're reading this book, to kind of get a visual on some of the places. And it was really fun because in this, he interviews people who are like specialists. And so a bunch of the people he talks to in this book are in the Smithsonian channel piece. And for some reason, it didn't click when he's writing about them that they would have thick Massachusetts accents. But they do, which was great. I had a blast. But like in that 1 hour documentary, one of the things they show you, and it's like a thing where I was like, I didn't even read this, I saw it, is the initial thing called Venetian glass. It's kind of an old wives' tale folk magic-y thing, where you have a bowl of water and you crack an egg and you take the egg yolk and you pour it in the glass, like the bowl, and whatever shape the egg yolk takes, or not the egg yolk, the egg white, is supposed to give you a hint as to the profession of your future husband. So that's Venetian glass. That's what it's called. In the exhibit, and I wonder if I have a picture of this. If not, I'll just explain it. They say Venetian glass, a game where you crack an egg on a mirror. And I'm like, I don't know how that happened, but it was like a thing where you run things through translation twice and it completely changes the meaning. So my only other beef with the show is that the layout was not great. They kind of seemed to think more people would be in the first 2 rooms, or really the second room, than there were. The last section after the McQueen is the section with the pictures of modern day witches, and that part was so crowded because the pathways were very small. But that was like the place where there was a lot to read, and the images were actually like really nice. There's like a fifth hallway room, like as you leave, where they have this painting. I was kind of like, put that one in the front. It's about the Salem Witch Trials. I don't give a shit. Put it in the front. So all in all, the exhibit, I'm kind of glad I saw it because the Peabody Essex Museum like holds their shit so tight. But I think they could have done more. And like I said, even with an exhibit like this, you can do more with a small amount of items if you just rely on secondary documents and documentation and maybe some videos. I don't know. I'm not a designer. But I wish sometimes museums would like try to make things more fun, you know? I like reading children's books sometimes when it comes to nonfiction items because they really have to dilute things to the simplest form. They assume you know nothing, and so they explain it to you in a way that makes sense if you know nothing. Sometimes I think museums really need to pick that up. So another piece I kind of want to briefly talk about that I happened to see while I was at the New York Historical Society was the Black is Beautiful exhibition, which I believe closed the weekend I saw it, so the 15th-ish. So to explain the exhibition, I kind of need to explain to you who the photographer who's being exhibited is. His name is Kwame Braithwaite. He was a very important photographer, and he is the creator of the phrase Black is Beautiful for the Naturally 62 exhibition, which I believe he and his brother were pioneers for. This is his first major exhibition. It focuses on his art mostly through the 60s. He and his brother were the founders of the African Jazz Art Society and Studios. And there were a lot of pictures about shows put on by them, other artists like Max Roach, playing, singing. The exhibit then focuses on his work with the Grandessa models, who were all Black women who wore their hair naturally. A lot of them wore a lot of African print and kind of African, Nigerian specifically style clothing. They had a picture or wall of albums for which they had modeled. There were shows, pictures of them wearing fashion. I did have some fun interactions. I ran into, so in the last room, it was kind of exclusively focusing on their fashion design. So there's these dresses, and I was looking at one of the dresses, and there's a woman standing next to me, and she starts saying, like, oh, I know this woman, the woman who designed this. She used to live next door to me when I was a kid. She taught me how to sew. And I was like, what? And so we actually had a nice little conversation. I love this kind of shit. It just happens in New York. And also, older people, sometimes they just want to talk to you, and it's great. Because they have some weird stories. And she was like, yeah, this dress is crocheted. She did try to teach me crochet, but I'm not good at it. And then she also told me, well, she identified the woman whose name was Dee Dee Little, in one of the pictures that was behind us. And then she also told me that apparently she had seen that she had passed, I believe, last year, and she was still in contact with her daughter. So she had reached out and talked to her, reconnected, and that was really cool. Just a fun thing. It was like, oh wow, old New York stories. You'll have to see it. And then I went into the next room, and while I was looking at a picture, some woman walked up to me and started explaining to me that my mask limited my oxygen, and I really shouldn't wear it because I was limiting the amount of oxygen I was breathing in. And actually, the ventilation inside meant that the air was better inside than it was outside, and I didn't have to wear it per museum policy, and I really shouldn't. To which I think I was kind of baffled because this has never happened to me, and also, why would it happen to me in a museum? It's a crowded room. What the fuck is it because I'm fat? Is it because I'm fat? She just came up to me and said this. I think I just looked at her. I was like, and then she just kind of went, okay, but it limits your oxygen. Okay, bye, bye, bye. And she just left. And I was like, what the fuck? My whole vibe is off. I can't enjoy this anymore. By that point, I had done with the exhibition, but it was still very weird. So, just two moments that really encapsulate the New York experience, which was fun. So all in all, I kind of sat down and I was thinking about all of this. I was like, what is the lesson I take from this?
Not every story has a lesson, Ocean.
No. What is it about Salem that makes people go fucking nuts over it? So I didn't have a script for this section, so I kind of went on a long ass rant. And to spare you all most of that, here's a brief description of what I came up with. So the Salem Witch Trials are kind of unique in American history, not necessarily for the events themselves, but for the way that they were remembered. It's this kind of perfect storm of shit that encapsulates so many different aspects of American culture, and its status as a significant moment in American history was only furthered by further fictionalizations, like Arthur Miller's The Crucible and other adaptations. I think that also the central figures of the young girls who get so much power in such a quick moment, that leads to so many accusations and convictions and executions, and they manage to reach all the way up to the governor's own wife, makes this all an extremely significant moment in American history. That Salem has only gone on to embrace its reputation as the Witch City has only gone on to solidify its reputation as a haunted location, and it is now iconic in American and international witch lore. As for the New York Historical Society's show, I think one thing they really forgot to do was emphasize the humanity of these people, that they were not necessarily stereotypes or archetypes as we have come to know them through fictionalizations or through our own lack of knowledge about that period of history. And they didn't work around that enough with signage and secondary materials to explain who they were, what they had seen, and what they had lived through, which I think is not only an important part of the history that often gets overlooked, but would help a modern audience connect with these people more and understand what they were going through. There's some effort to that effect with the section on the modern day witches, but there wasn't that kind of detail for the rest of them. Also, fun facts that I learned from reading A Season with the Witch: Giles Corey, the man who got pressed to death with stones, also once beat a servant to death for allegedly stealing apples. Because the man was a servant, he did not get charged with murder. Instead, I think it was overreaching his masterly duty, something like that. He got off easy. So, it's fun to know that even the most heroic figures of the story also have their own shit going on. Also, apparently, the ergot theory, which goes that all of this hullabaloo was caused by some bad wheat, causing hallucinations and other side effects, is apparently now considered wrong. It's been debunked because none of the afflicted ever showed any secondary signs of ergot poisoning, which include like long term brain trauma and essentially early dementia. So that one is officially ruled out. I still think that it is a likely contender for what's happening in the Vivitch because I don't see any of those people, well, the one person who lives through the end, lasting much longer. So that's fun to know. Back to your regularly scheduled programming. But yeah, uh, if you get nothing else, if you go to Salem, go to the Peabody Essex Museum. Maybe try to break in. I want to know what they have. I'm not sure they gave everything that was like good, and I want access to their archives. So if you get there and you break in, let me know. Steal me something good. If you come to New York, go to the New York Historical Society. I would look up in advance what shows they have because currently the big one is about Jewish delis, and apparently it's not great. It's like photography. It's like it's fine. Um, but sometimes they have really good exhibits. This one was kind of a miss, but I got to see Malleus Maleficarum. It was closed, and I didn't get to see anything inside, but I got to see one in person, and that was cool. So they also had a tarot setup thing for pictures, but I let my mom take pictures, and my mom is not good at pictures, so I didn't get great ones. Um, but yeah, check out A Season with the Witch if any of that interests you. The exhibit is closed, but keep an eye out in the New York Historical Society. And like there were a lot of good TikToks made that kind of just summarized everything, which is not great because I don't feel like any exhibit should be able to be summarized in a TikTok. But and that is it for this week. Next time, I'm working on two different projects, but one of them is a little culty. So that's the vibe. We're going from witches to cults. I think it's a 1-to-1. But yeah, that's it. I'll talk to you next time. I'm Theo. This is Bibliography. Oh god, that actually transferred a lot.